You can always save up again. Those words from my husband were the height of selfishness. That savings was for our daughter. It was absolutely not money for him to spend however he pleased. So I'm going to correct his misunderstanding. This will be my final parting gift and lesson to my soon-to-be ex-husband. Oh. I've already received the transfer. $6,000 from your mistress. What? Though I feel bad about involving his parents, this is about teaching my husband a lesson. They'll have to see it through to the end. My name is Amanda. I just turned 40 not too long ago. I live with my husband Sullivan and our daughter Lana, who's about to start high school. Though lately, I've had my doubts about Sullivan's place in our lives. Sullivan and I attended the same university. We weren't particularly close at first. But seeing each other often in lectures, joining the same club, and even ending up at the same company after graduation meant we started talking more and more. As time went on, we got to know each other well and grew closer. We each carried our own small loneliness. Sullivan grew up in a strict, traditional household in every sense, while I lost my parents early in life. Neither of us was completely alone. Sullivan's parents were strict, but not unloving, and I was raised by distant relatives. Still, we couldn't deny there were gaps in our lives that needed filling. So we each tried to fill them with our hobbies. Sullivan was what you'd call a car enthusiast, while I loved romantic fantasy stories. I suppose that's where we found common ground. The more we talked and connected, the closer we became, eventually leading to our engagement. However, it took time for Sullivan's parents to accept our engagement. His was what you'd call a good family, and they were hesitant about someone as ordinary as me becoming their son's fiancé. His father, in particular, would grimace every time he saw me. I sympathize with your circumstances, but that's that, and this is this, he said when we first met, words I still remember vividly. But perhaps my feelings reached them over time. His parents' strict attitude toward us gradually softened, and they finally accepted our engagement. We did it. Now we can be husband and wife. Yes, we can. I can still clearly remember how we celebrated that day. We became husband and wife, and a happy married life began. Sullivan threw himself into his work, and I gave my all as a full-time housewife after leaving my job. If the story ended there, it would have been a happy ending. But where there are happy endings, there are also bad ones. Of course, reality can't be simply divided into happiness and unhappiness. Still, at the very least, I couldn't have my happy ending. The reason was Sullivan. A little while after we married, Sullivan received orders from his company to transfer to a regional office. After discussing it as a couple, we decided to move there together. The pay would be better, so we thought it wouldn't be bad considering our future with children. I didn't think anything would change because of it. But in hindsight, that thinking was wrong. Can I buy a new car? It all started with Sullivan's suggestion right after we moved to our new location. Sullivan had been driving a used car he bought when he was single. It was the result of trying to buy it with just his own money without help from his parents, so a new car had been out of reach. His car wasn't new to begin with, and we'd used it a lot for our dates. Though I don't know much about cars, I suppose it was reaching its limit. While I felt a bit sad since it held so many memories, it couldn't be helped. When I nodded, Sullivan eagerly bought a new car. At this time, he barely listened to any of my opinions. They were just small suggestions, like the color of the car. But I didn't want to dampen Sullivan's excitement about finally being able to buy the new car he wanted. So I just watched him with a wry smile, though in retrospect, maybe I should have seen it as a warning sign. After all, until then, Sullivan had always listened to my opinions without dismissing them. The car Sullivan bought was flashy in both color and design. It was a big change from his previous used car with its subdued, older design. Perhaps it reflected what was in his heart. Sullivan had never been able to truly break away from his hometown where his parents lived. But when this transfer effectively distanced him from them, it seems he was freed from some kind of mental constraint. For Sullivan, buying the car might have been his final confirmation of that freedom. Whether consciously or unconsciously, Sullivan began to change bit by bit from that point on. His growing tyrannical attitude toward me was just the beginning. While we used to discuss and decide various things as a couple, Sullivan's judgment gradually took precedence, and he started making all sorts of decisions on his own. Didn't we agree the next purchase would be a new microwave? Why did you buy another car without discussing it? Don't be so uptight. The dealer said now was the best time to buy. Even when I questioned him with concern, Sullivan would dodge the issue. However, at least during this period, he still showed some remorse. That visibly disappeared after our daughter Lana was born. I'd heard that sometimes a husband's perspective and values change after childbirth. But honestly, I couldn't believe someone could change as dramatically as Sullivan did. At first, I thought it was just stress from being busy at work. But that wasn't the case at all. Even after things settled down at work, Sullivan rarely showed any interest in me. Moreover, he began to act intimidating toward me. Why don't you help with housework anymore? You said you'd help take care of Lana too. When we first married, Sullivan had eagerly helped with housework. He used to say that kind of cooperation was the secret to a happy marriage. He had promised we would continue helping each other even after having children. But he spoke as if no such promise had ever existed. I'm busy with work. You handle the house. Don't act so high and mighty when you don't even earn money. If you want to have an opinion, try earning more than me. Since I was a full-time housewife at the time, I felt uncomfortable when he said things like that. So at first, I tried my best to manage on my own, as he said, while attempting to find work I could do from home since Lana was just a baby. Sullivan seemed satisfied seeing me follow his words. That's how it should be. That's how it's always been in our family. Even as times changed, Sullivan's family held on to their old ways. His father supposedly worked his wife to the bone. Sullivan used to hate his parents' old-fashioned thinking. But as he grew older, he began justifying his own tyrannical behavior by saying that's how it was at home. Because that's how his parents' house was, his father was, his mother was, he would do the same. It's ironic that after being freed from what had bound him, he became more like what had constrained him. But honestly, I question whether his parents' household was really as he described. Sullivan seemed completely unaware of this and began living according to his own desires. He was almost completely indifferent to Lana. He didn't know and didn't try to learn what foods she liked or what interested her. Because of this, Lana began looking at him coldly from an early age, but Sullivan didn't notice that either. Instead, he was obsessed with cars, finding some reason to buy one every time a model he liked was released. Shut up. It's my money, I can use it however I want. When I tried to say he was going too far with his third car purchase, Sullivan wouldn't even listen. If you're saying life is getting hard, figure it out yourself. Though you probably can't. Perhaps finding me annoying, Sullivan gradually spent less time at home. Still, things were better until a few years ago. Even as our life became chaotic, Sullivan hadn't touched the savings for Lana's future. though that too might have just been a matter of time. Feeling a sense of crisis, I continued working in my own way to help with household expenses. But that didn't solve our money problems. Then Sullivan crossed the final line. Sullivan, explain yourself. You withdrew money from Lana's savings account, didn't you? I noticed the money in the account for Lana's education expenses, which included my previous work savings, had decreased when I went to deposit part of my salary. Sullivan managed the bank book itself, so I couldn't see the detailed statement. But if the balance shown in the transaction notices had decreased noticeably, of course I would notice. There was no doubt he had betrayed us by secretly using our important savings. But Sullivan had crossed another line as well. What did you use it for? Another car? It's not a car this time. Though it's true I want to replace my car soon since it's getting old. Sullivan's grinning face showed no trace of the sincerity he had when we married. To me, feeling sad and confused, Sullivan dropped an even more shocking revelation: it's a woman. What's wrong with seeking the charm I can't find in you anymore from another woman? What? Do you understand what you're saying? Sullivan's words were nothing less than openly admitting to an affair. As I stood there dumbfounded, Sullivan continued without any shame, I'm saying I'm having an affair. Well, she's my main woman now, so it's not really an affair anymore. Looking at Sullivan's smiling face as he spouted such nonsense, I felt overwhelmed with sadness. But Sullivan didn't notice my sadness at all. If anything, he piled on more words that intensified my sorrow. Just so you know, it's pointless to tattle to my parents. Dad and Mom will laugh it off and forgive me. After all, they're from a time when affairs were considered a sign of a man's success. Sullivan seemed confident that such outdated sayings could justify his affair. He must really believe it. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly admit his affair to me. Understanding this reality, my love for Sullivan distinctly cooled. Though the tendency had been there before, this clearly foolish behavior was the final straw. Be prepared, I'll divorce you when the time comes. Watching Sullivan leave with a contemptuous smirk, I felt strongly that I couldn't put up with him anymore. At this rate, not just my life but Lana's would be ruined too. I couldn't let that happen. With that in mind, I quietly began taking action. At the same time, I asked Lana again, Lana, what do you think about your father? At the time, Lana was working hard preparing for her high school entrance exams. I felt bad about distracting her in such circumstances, but if things continued this way, she might have bigger problems than exams and high school life. Feeling apologetic, I asked, and Lana answered candidly. If you're asking if I hate him, I absolutely hate him. After all, Dad's having an affair, isn't he? What? You knew. Surprised by my reaction, Lana continued speaking, not trying to hide her bitter expression. I thought so. I sometimes smelled perfume that wasn't yours, so I had a feeling. I only found out recently. It's amazing you noticed. You've been busy with work lately, so it's understandable. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to keep it secret, but it was difficult. According to Lana, if I hadn't noticed my husband's affair, she had planned to tell me when the time was right. But she said she couldn't find the right moment because I always seemed busy. I'm sorry for making you worry about such things. Don't worry about it. So what are you going to do? While I blinked in surprise, Lana asked casually, as if it were nothing, if you're going to divorce Dad, I'm all for it. Don't worry about my exams. If anything, I might do better because I'll be happier. I felt relieved seeing Lana's smile. She had been my biggest concern regarding divorce, but she seemed completely fine with it. If that's the case, while I might wait a bit longer for timing, there's no problem with divorcing. The issue is which of us, me or Sullivan, can take control of the situation. Sullivan too would want to divorce on terms favorable to him. Time passed while I considered such things, and Lana finished her high school entrance exams and was accepted. When I told Sullivan, he smiled happily for once. In that case, we should tell my parents and celebrate. His words and expression were hard to believe, given how he had recently hinted at divorce. Though I found it suspicious, there was nothing objectionable about the words themselves. So after my vague nod, we arranged a small celebration party at his parents' house in a week. Though they called it a party, it was meant to be more like a light meal gathering. His parents weren't too strict with Lana, and their relationship was peaceful. Perhaps because of this, while Lana showed reluctance at it being Sullivan's suggestion, she seemed to look forward to meeting his parents and having the party. But honestly, I couldn't shake my unease. However, unable to come up with a clear answer, we soon found ourselves on that day. Lana and I got into Sullivan's car with mixed feelings. In contrast, Sullivan seemed somewhat cheerful. After about an hour's drive in this indescribable atmosphere, we arrived at his parents' house. Welcome. Today's a celebration, so eat as much as you like. Wow, amazing. Various dishes were laid out in the spacious living room. There was even pizza, presumably prepared for Lana. Just that small detail gave me a glimpse of the thoughtfulness behind his parents' stern exterior. Just as I was about to thank them for their consideration, Sullivan spoke up, "Before we eat, there's something I'd like to discuss." "Is that okay?" "Keep it brief," his father answered calmly and gently, while his mother quietly nodded beside him. After confirming this, Sullivan, who had been grinning, put on a serious expression and spoke up. "Now that Lana has been accepted, I'll talk about what I've been holding back. I can't take it anymore, Amanda. I want a divorce." As I stood there confused, Sullivan declared grandly, "Listen, Dad, Mom. Amanda has been withdrawing and using money from the account we saved for Lana." It was a sudden and incomprehensible statement. Moreover, it was Sullivan who had been using the money. While I was dumbfounded, Sullivan presented the bank book to his parents as evidence. "Wait a minute. Sullivan has had the bank book all along. There's no point lying in panic. The problem is that the money has been moving. It's terrible, using up almost all of your daughter's money." I wanted to hold my head in my hands, so this was his purpose in suggesting today's party. The bank book only showed records of money being withdrawn, not who withdrew it. And naturally, his parents would tend to believe their son's words. I think Sullivan's aim was to divorce me, make me out to be the villain, take alimony from me, and then remarry his mistress. While his parents examined the bank book with stern faces, Sullivan whispered in my ear, "I used the account money to buy a new car." He must be confident that no matter what I claim, his parents won't believe my words. Sullivan continued, speaking with a laugh, "You can save up again." His face showed complete confidence in his victory. But whether he could maintain that expression until the end remained to be seen. "By the way, I have one question, what's the last date in that bank book?" At my question, Sullivan briefly showed a puzzled expression. But he must have thought it was just sour grapes or something. "A week ago, but so what?" "Oh, was your salary deposited?" "It must be a tiny amount. We'll have to save up for our daughter's education expenses again." Sullivan mockingly laughed at me. but hearing those words confirmed it, our victory. After nodding to Lana, who was anxiously watching me, I announced in a relatively loud voice, "Oh. I've already received the transfer. $6,000 from your mistress. If you don't believe me, why don't you go check the record now?" His father, who had finished checking the bankbook and was about to say something to me, seemed to have his words scattered by my unexpected statement. For a moment, he stood there with his mouth hanging open in surprise. His mother and Sullivan were the same. But quickly recovering his composure, his father asked me, "Could you explain what you mean?" "Of course. By mistress, I mean Sullivan's affair partner. She's not here now, but I've already finished talking with her." This must have been completely unexpected. Sullivan, having lost all his previous composure, widened his eyes in shock. "What are you talking about? What do you mean you've already finished talking?" "It means exactly what I said. My discussion with Haley is over. After making my decision, I had hired a private investigator to thoroughly investigate Sullivan's surroundings. As a result, I was able to grasp most of the details about his mistress's background and position. It's strange to think he wouldn't be investigated after admitting to having an affair himself. Well, I suppose Sullivan had completely underestimated me. Or perhaps he thought I wouldn't leave him so easily." Haley, age 29. Office worker. A clerk at one of your company's business partners. I listed Haley's information one by one. Perhaps from shock, Sullivan could only open and close his mouth without speaking. Since interruptions would be troublesome, I continued while he was speechless. "Haley said she was attracted to you because you seemed well off. Doesn't that sound like she was attracted to your money?" Lana let out a small giggle, and I joined in with a laugh. Perhaps realizing this was provocation, Sullivan began trembling with anger. Ignoring his state, I continued speaking. "So, because you seemed so generous with money, she decided to keep dating you and take as much as she could. She said she talked about marriage because of that too." "That's ridiculous." Finally, Sullivan protested my words. "You're wrong. Haley isn't like that." "Oh? Then what is she like?" "Haley fell in love with my personality and work ethic. She said she loved how serious I am." "He's hardly serious." I almost burst out laughing hearing that. What's so funny? A serious person wouldn't have an affair in the first place. I could barely contain my laughter at such a simple truth. Lana seemed to feel the same way, covering her mouth as her shoulders shook. But there was still more to say. With his father watching, I somehow suppressed my urge to laugh out loud. "Unfortunately, Haley isn't the kind of woman you think she is." "What proof do you have?" Half shouting, Sullivan seemed quite worked up. Apparently, he was quite serious about Haley. But his feelings would never be reciprocated. Because when I told her I would take her to court for damages, she immediately abandoned you. "What?" When I said this, Sullivan let out an incredulous cry. But facts can't be changed. Indeed, Haley had abandoned Sullivan. She begged me, saying she'd do anything but go to court. She'd tell me everything and cooperate, just please forgive her. So I settled with her paying damages without going to court. Haley seemed desperate to avoid court at all costs. I reached a settlement with her, securing her promise to pay $60,000 in damages and fully cooperate in making the divorce favorable to me. That's a lie. It's not a lie. She told me all sorts of things. How you two met, which hotels you used, and when and how much you spend on her." Sullivan's face drained of color as he realized what my words meant. He must have understood their implications. Just to be sure, I checked the notepad I had brought containing the information from Haley. "Father-in-law, wasn't there a withdrawal of about $2,000 around last November?" I asked his father, who was holding the bank book. He had been watching the situation with a stern face, and now he silently flipped through the pages. When he reached the relevant page, his brow furrowed even deeper. Indeed, there was a withdrawal. What was this used for? It was for a designer handbag. The latest model, apparently. I don't know much about these things myself. While saying this, I mentioned several of Sullivan's gifts to Haley from around the time he started using Lana's account. The amounts might have varied slightly, but they largely matched up. So Sullivan's claim that I used the account money was a lie. As I shrugged, Sullivan spoke up in apparent outrage. "So what? Just because the amounts happen to match doesn't prove anything. The same could be said about Mom supposedly using the money, right?" Lana pointed out with a calmness that contrasted with Sullivan's state. "You can't just show withdrawal amounts and claim Mom used them." "Well, Dad was trying to get away with exactly that earlier." Lana's words made sense. Thinking rationally, you can't prove someone guilty with just bank records. If reported to the police and properly investigated, it would probably be easy to disprove. They could check bank surveillance footage of withdrawals, for instance. But Sullivan had completely underestimated me. He must have thought I couldn't go that far. He assumed he was overwhelmingly dominant and I would just quietly obey. But once he used money meant for none other than Lana, I had no intention of holding back. For the sake of my precious daughter, I wouldn't hesitate to punish him. If you're saying this isn't enough proof, I have other evidence too. Saying this, I took out some of the evidence I had brought from my bag. I'd rather not show you this, but here's evidence of his relationship with his mistress, Haley. The photos collected by the investigation agency showed their dates, them entering and leaving hotels, scenes of them kissing, all sufficient evidence of the affair. Just as I was about to hand the stack of photos to his father, Sullivan shouted, "What does that matter?" and snatched the evidence from my hands, tearing it to pieces. That's not a great way to destroy evidence, you know? I sighed quietly before turning back to Sullivan. He was breathing heavily, apparently in an extreme state of agitation. "Shut up. Besides, I have plenty more evidence." I said, "Shut up. What's wrong with having an affair?" Cutting off my words, Sullivan spouted outdated nonsense completely divorced from modern society. Women should just support their husbands without saying anything. Ugh. Disgusting, Lana muttered quietly but with clear disgust. But even such words didn't seem to reach Sullivan's heart. His face contorted uglily as he raised his voice further. "You didn't even notice the affair until I told you. I'm the one feeding you. Right, Dad?" And with that, his words turned toward his father. "I finally understand how you feel, Dad. Of course you're strict with Mom. If we don't discipline them properly, they'll never understand my greatness." Sullivan wore a creepy smile. Whether he was aware of it himself was unclear. Honestly, I wanted to show him a mirror. But Sullivan himself continued speaking as if in top form. "Dad, you understand, right? They're making such a fuss over just an affair. Even though affairs are a sign of a man's success." However, that tone didn't last much longer. Slap. A sharp sound rang out. His father had slapped Sullivan's cheek. While rubbing his cheek from the pain, Sullivan looked at his father's face again. That's when he finally noticed the demonic expression his father wore. "Is that how you saw me?" "But Dad, I always thought you thought that way." "Enough of this nonsense." At his father's roar, Sullivan let out another cry. Sullivan's mother watched the two with sad eyes. "True, my words and expressions toward your mother and you might have been stern. But I never once intended to make your mother or you sad or suffer." Faced with his father's severe gaze, Sullivan seemed thoroughly frightened. Just from this reaction, it was clear that his father had never truly directed anger at Sullivan or his mother before. That's why Sullivan was confused and afraid when faced with it for the first time. Meanwhile, his mother only maintained her sad gaze. Before marriage, when I heard about his parents from Sullivan, I had vaguely imagined them as unreasonable people who would find fault with everything. But after meeting them several times, I realized that was wrong. True, his father and mother's words and looks were stern, but they were reasonable. If they just wanted to impose unreasonable demands, they wouldn't have softened their attitude and permitted the marriage. Their concern about their son's marriage partner's family background was out of worry for Sullivan. While it might be considered old-fashioned thinking, it's true that having someone from a good family whose background was clear would be reassuring. Moreover, if they were truly too strict, I don't think their marriage could have lasted until now. Of course, there must be people in the world who force others into relationships they can't escape. But in the occasional glances exchanged between his parents, I never sensed any such unpleasant dynamic. Sullivan must have only seen things the way he wanted to see them. He needed reasons to rebel against a home that imposed strictness on him, reasons to become close to me. For that, he had viewed his parents' relationship and upbringing as worse than they actually were. This wasn't limited to his parents, it applied to me, Lana, and Haley as well. He only wanted to see things in ways that benefited him. That was Sullivan's essence and true nature. His parents must have understood this. Perhaps that's why they had raised Sullivan strictly. But after separating from his parents, Sullivan's restraints came loose. And to say affairs are a sign of success. Ridiculous. How could someone who cheats ever be right? That was simply the truth, plain and undeniable. It had nothing to do with whether his family was strict or not, it should have been easy to understand. But Sullivan had chosen to ignore this obvious fact with self-serving excuses. When confronted head-on with this undeniable truth, Sullivan could only let out a foolish groan. After expressing his feelings towards Sullivan with a sigh, his father turned to me. "I am deeply sorry that my foolish son has done something unforgivable." After bowing deeply to me, his father declared firmly, "Continuing with such a son would be a waste of your time. Please leave him and live a new life. Of course, we'll make him pay alimony and ensure a favorable division of assets for you." Surely as parents, they must have wanted to take Sullivan's side. That's parental love, I think. "Are you sure about this?" When I asked, his father nodded deeply. Seeing this, his mother, who had maintained silence until now, spoke up. "Amanda, you are truly kind. Someone who took advantage of such kindness doesn't deserve forgiveness. Our patience has completely run out as well." "Mother-in-law, thank you." "No thanks necessary. If anything, we should apologize. I'm at a loss for words at how foolish our son turned out to be." Saying this, his mother seemed to tear up a bit. Sullivan's actions had exceeded the limits of parental love. While it was his own doing, I felt pain in my heart for his parents. Lana also looked at them with a sad expression. Yet, This is ridiculous. I won't allow it. Sullivan alone continued to make a fuss, still unable to accept reality. Even his father was showing an exasperated expression towards Sullivan now, and Lana was looking at him like something filthy. You're the one who won't be allowed, Sullivan. And even if we did nothing, the outcome wouldn't change. There was mountains of evidence of the affair, and his mistress would testify to reduce her damages payment. Even if it went to court, Sullivan had no chance of winning. Especially with his parents' cooperation. Whether he didn't understand this or had some secret plan, Sullivan was still laughing, though with a strained expression. Yes, the outcome won't change. Right, Amanda? You can't possibly survive on your earnings alone. You'll have to rely on me. No, I already told you Haley transferred the money, remember? That's a lie. It can't be true. Even if it is, it'll run out quickly with Lana's school expenses. After shaking his head vigorously like a child throwing a tantrum, all Sullivan could come up with was his own hopeful assumption. To show him how wrong he was, I declared. Unfortunately, that's just your assumption. I can fully support living with Lana now. I took out my personal bankbook from my bag, opened it, and showed it. Seeing it, Sullivan let out a dumbfounded voice. What? How? You were mostly at home, how did you earn this much? The bankbook showed savings of nearly $100,000. Unable to believe this, Sullivan stood there in shock as I casually said, there are quite a few jobs you can do from home. In my case, I'm a writer. A writer? Mom's been working a lot all this time, though it's natural you wouldn't know since you had no interest in us, Lana added. During my time at home, I had been constantly accepting various writing assignments online during my free time. Sullivan, you said it yourself, didn't you? Don't complain about my money, figure things out yourself. So I tried my best. At first, I was at a loss about what to do. So I decided to start with what I loved, which led me to writing stories. Of course, things didn't go well right away. I started writing when there wasn't even a proper online system for accepting assignments. I submitted to magazines repeatedly without success, faced many failures, and often couldn't even find assignments. But by steadily continuing my daily efforts, I earned recognition, and good reviews started spreading. Now Mom even gets requests to write game scenarios, including for some famous titles that even I know, Lana added proudly. Recently, I'd started receiving such major assignments. Still, I have to admit the income is unstable. But I feel confident about my current work. By the way, I had only been depositing part of my income into our joint account. As Sullivan's true nature became more apparent, I felt it would be dangerous to deposit everything, a judgment that proved correct, given how he had been using money as he pleased. So we don't need your help anymore. Though we'll gladly accept the alimony and child support. That's impossible. Things like this can't happen. Are you saying I have nowhere to go anymore? Apparently quite shocked, Sullivan muttered to himself for a while. But suddenly raising his head, he shouted with bloodshot eyes. That's right. Haley won't abandon me. This must all be your lies. She needs me. Saying this while glaring at all of us, Sullivan ran out. Will he be okay? Lana's words weren't so much concerned for Sullivan's safety as wondering if he might cause trouble for someone. But even if we chased after him now, we probably couldn't catch up. So we'd have to leave him alone for a while. I'll bring him back if necessary, so don't worry, his father's words, which perfectly understood our intentions, brought relief. However, this is troublesome. I didn't expect this to happen, so we might have ordered too much food. Looking at the large amount of food left in the room, Lana and I exchanged glances and smiled wryly. Together, we bowed to his parents. After that, things took a somewhat unexpected turn. First, regarding Sullivan's mistress Haley, she was arrested by the police. I had found it strange, she had readily transferred the large amount in damages. I wondered if her family might be wealthy, but if so, she wouldn't have needed to pursue Sullivan in the first place. The truth was, she was a kind of con artist. Like with Sullivan, she had approached many men and taken their money, accumulating quite a sum. This was discovered by one of the men, who reported her to the police, leading to her arrest. So what happened to Sullivan, who had sought refuge with Haley? When that option was closed off by her arrest, he was found in a daze by his father and restrained. But being cornered like this made Sullivan try clinging to us instead. I was wrong. Let's start over. Of course, there was no reason to accept such a proposal. When I informed his father that Sullivan had been calling both me and Lana, he became furious again and thoroughly squeezed Sullivan down. As a result, Sullivan agreed to the divorce. He promised to pay alimony and child support, and accepted an asset division that wouldn't disadvantage us. Currently, Sullivan is at his parents' house, where they say they're going to reshape his character. He has to wake up extremely early since it's far from his workplace. Moreover, news of our divorce had completely spread at his company. Perhaps because I had been an employee there too. Colleagues who noticed Sullivan acting strangely had contacted me to ask about the situation. As co-workers, they probably didn't want to get caught up in Sullivan's mistakes, which was understandable. I had no reason to hide anything, so I answered truthfully. And what I told them spread rapidly throughout the company. Having everything exposed, Sullivan is now subjected to cold stares from those around him, making his workplace feel like sitting on needles. They say that being exposed to stress every day has left Sullivan quite emaciated. As for us, we're living comfortably now that Sullivan, the source of our stress, is gone. Lana started high school a little while ago. Though I had worried about our divorce affecting her, she flatly denied it with a "no way" and a smile. After the game scenario I wrote received extremely high praise, I'm now flooded with requests. Of course, I can't accept all of them, so I'm carefully reviewing each one. This is truly what they call a happy dilemma. It might be difficult for this experience to be useful in the future, but if the opportunity arises, it might not be bad to compile this story somehow. While it's an unpleasant memory, I can't deny that those events are part of our memories. To avoid seeing things only as we want to, like Sullivan did, there's value in recording it. I'll gradually write down what happened back then, so I won't have trouble when that time comes. Somehow, I found myself hoping that someday, I could read what I've written together with my daughter and laugh about it.